Hi everyone, Mark Cabanis here for a Jubilate Music Group Composer Spotlight. And with us in the spotlight today is Benjamin Harlan. Welcome, Benjamin Harlan, to Composer Spotlight.
Thank you so much, Mark. Delighted to be here.
Well, thank you, Benji. Listen, everyone, anyone who knows Benji Harlan knows that you're in for a treat. Anytime you spend time with Benji, it's always fun. It's always a laugh. Benji, no pressure. You don't have to tell any jokes or anything like that. But we're here to get to know Benji a little bit more for our viewers. Benjamin Harlan, not only the person, but Benjamin Harlan, the composer and arranger. So tell us, Benji, a little bit about your background. Now, where are you from and where did you grow up and that sort of thing?
I'm from rural North Louisiana, a little mill town called Winfield. And like a lot of kids my age, I grew up in a church that had wonderful music and had a local piano teacher who was a church organist. And that is what started my lifelong love of music. I remember actually music as far back as the first grade with our music teacher in there. So, small town, and every small town has a good piano teacher. That's the way I got started.
You bet. And Benji, we all have those early musical memories, which mean so much to us. But do you and defining moments in our lives? What would you consider, say, some of the defining moments early in your life, or whenever they might have happened, or one at least one of them, that made you have that light bulb moment to say, "Hey, I want to spend my life in music."
Well, if I go back all the way to the first grade, which is where my first musical memories are, I remember how much I loved when the classroom music teacher came in and started to teach us fundamentals. Then later in elementary school, I wanted to take piano lessons, but I never practiced. The teacher could get pretty upset when you didn't practice, and I quit after a couple of years. Well, then we had what we called junior choir at church. And I wanted to impress the girl my age who played for junior choir. And then when I got into junior high school, I decided that I wanted to study piano again. And at that time, I was very motivated. So church made a big impression, as well as the youth musical things of the 1970s. We had big youth choir. We sang Good News, Tell It Like It Is, Celebrate Life. And that then, of course, led me to my years at Baylor, which were very, really helped form a lot of who I am and helped me get those things I needed to be a musician, develop those skills.
But at this point, let's do shift to, well, let me just summarize so far. You've had this rich background in church music as a player. And when's the first time you accompanied a choir? How old were you at that point? I'd be curious to know.
I played through the youth choir when I was in high school, and that led to me being the officially anointed church pianist. My teacher was the organist, and we played there at First Baptist Church in Winfield for all the years until I went to college.
There you go. So you've had this rich background, you Southern Baptist, and I know you're ecumenical over the years as well with what churches not only do your music, but where you have served and those kind of things, either on an interim or a part-time basis or whatnot. But so there you have that rich background in church music as a pianist, as a singer, and then eventually a conductor. Of course, Baylor. You went to school. Where else did you got your? Of course, you have your doctorate. Where did you get your what's your academic pedigree again, Benji? I should remember this.
Well, I got 2 degrees from Baylor, then did the final degree at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, where I later returned as Dean of the Music School.
Right. And I know you did that for several years, and then you got bitten by the bug, or whatever we want to call it, to write and arrange. What spurred that, Benji? Was it necessity is the mother of invention, or how did that come about?
Well, I would say that my interest in that began at Baylor. I had a lot of friends at Baylor who became writers and had things published. I could mention, Baylor has everyone from Burl Red and Rob Sterling and Mark Hayes and Don Kaysen and John Lee. just a lot of it. And so I was serving my first church in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I just thought that I had something to say. And so fairly early, I had some success. Some other things that happened at Baylor along the way that gave me the skills that I needed. First thing is when I went to Baylor, I thought I would be an organ major. And after I heard Joyce Jones play Flight of the Bumblebee with her feet, I thought, I need to do something else. And so I decided to be a theory major, was told that it would never be anything that would give me gainful employment. But we had a man there who oversaw the theory department. His name was Herbert Colvin, that I just adored. And he unveiled all the magic of harmony. That, and then when I went to Southwestern and I started hearing music by John Rutter and all those, just smitten by the harmonies and the melodies. That's something that I wanted to do. So that's what I jumped into when I was a minister of music, and it's been a great ride. And you've been an important part of it, Mark, for which I thank you.
Oh, thank you, Benji. It's a joy and a pleasure. And well, so what then was your very first published piece, and who published it?
Well, when I first started writing, the first publications were when the old Sunday school board had their periodicals. I think the first thing I did was a final stanza harmonization of Joy to the World in Pedal Point magazine. Sharon Lyon told me it had been accepted. I got $40 for it and I showed it to everyone. The first anthem that I had published was while I was in Shreveport, and it was something with old Shawnee Press when they were up in Delaware, Watergate, Pennsylvania, and Lou Kirby was their editor. So that's the way it all started. And from there, it's just been, and you know how music is, you just layer opportunity and things on top of each other. And now I look back and feel that I'm just now learning things I wish I'd learned many years ago. Of course, there were other influences at Baylor, not only the height of the youth musicals, but Kirk Kaiser's big footprint in the Baylor and the Waco community. I went to Seventh and James until I had my own church to play in. And it was just a real rich time of life for music, for relationships, for friendships, for learning that wonderful life balance between being serious about your studies and having plenty of time to party.
I love it. Benji, let's talk about your process now. I mean, when you're looking to do something, I mean, either are you drawn to arrangements or original texts and tunes? I mean, what excites you to say this I want to do? How does that happen? And I know it's always a lot of times it's different from piece to piece, but in general, I mean, where do you get your inspiration and what makes Benjamin Harlan all these years later after that very first piece being published, what makes you excited about saying, I want to do this one, I want to do that one?
Well, I would say, Mark, when I started, I always tried to do original pieces because I knew that those are things that publishers didn't have multiple submissions on that title. And so to me, text drives everything. The beauty of language, and as Martin Luther said, coupled with music, the Word of God, ascends us to heights that we have not experienced. So after I did that for a while, I found that I could get some things that were arrangements, some things I did because they were practical things for my church choir. Some things I did because I just loved the hymn. But I would say the first thing that happens is finding worthy text. And then I would say the thing that drives me most is I do like to do original things because when you have a great text and you can find that wonderful melody to hang those words on, and even in that, there's a magical process. I tell students now it's a Christmas tune that I wrote some years ago for you when you were at another publisher. And I remember there was one little phrase in there that had a little sequence in it. And when I play it for students, I'll play that little sequence and I'll say, so what's the next note? and they sing what the next note's going to be. So when I wrote it, I thought, how boring is that, that it would be so predictable? You know, it took me a couple of days, but I realized that I only had to change one note to make that phrase have a little magic in it. And so just from note to note. And then I think that every word and every note has to be put under the microscope. You know, all the things under the hood, the internal lines, the secondary lines, the way you use the text, the harmonic progressions that follow, uh, you know, follow harmonic principle, but at the same time, there's all kinds of room to find creative things and still, you know, follow the rules. So as I tell people, making music is some of it is following principle and proven scientific things. Uh, Other parts of it is just sheer magic, putting it all together and find out what makes every piece unique. You know, a student will say they want to write an arrangement of Amazing Grace. And I tell them, well, you probably won't get it published since there's 10 million arrangements of Amazing Grace out. And I point out, if you ask 10 million people to do an arrangement of Amazing Grace, no two of them would be the very same. So that's part of all the things that go through a writer's head to find things that are unique, to put them together in such a way that you say something that's fresh and falls beautifully on the ears.
Benji, as we start to wrap up here with this time with you, I'll ask. Let's shift about encouragement that you can give to music directors who are watching this. You know, you and I know, and everyone knows, paying attention. Church choirs aren't the same as they were. Of course, hardly anything's the same as it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. But let's say, you know, even 30 years ago, you know, we know the choirs aren't, and church choirs aren't quite as plentiful as they were 30 years ago for a variety of reasons, which we don't even have to go in. And I think people who are watching know why. But there's still tons of vibrant choirs out there. And that's why I'm able to keep doing what I'm doing, and you too as a writer. But my question is what can you say to directors watching Benji to encourage them to keep carrying the banner of quality traditional church choral music?
Well, Mark, that's a question that has a lot of little tentacles to it. But I would say at the end of the day, and I want to refer to something that book that I read back during COVID. There's a man from George Washington University who decided during COVID that he and his wife would find the earliest recording of Handel's Messiah. So, based on that, he wrote a book called The Life and Troubled Times of Handel's Messiah. And it goes through all of Handel's years in England. Italian opera had fallen out of favor. And so he started writing these unstaged operas called oratorios. And then there was a wealthy aristocrat who was smitten by Handel, who put together all these biblical texts that became Messiah. Incidentally, that person thought Handel did a pretty poor job. You know, he'd write these choruses, that he would do a lot of scripture with a little recitative and all of that. Anyway, but what I want to tell you this is that Handel's Messiah was first performed on Good Friday in Dublin, Ireland in 1742, and Good Friday was on Friday the 13th. So Handel went to Dublin, Ireland, and while he was there, he used a young soloist that he had used before named Susanna Sibber in London. He took her over to Dublin to sing for him. And even the background of Susanna Sibber is something worth reading that book. But I want to read to you what was said of his singer, the Susanna Sibber. And that is, there was an English music historian named Charles Burney. And Charles Burney said of Sibber's singing that she often penetrated the heart when others with infinitely greater voice and skill could only reach the ear. And I thought, how can we possibly settle for anything less? If the music in our worship doesn't reach into hearts, aren't we just adding noise to a world that has too much of it? I still get upset when I go to a gas pump and they're pumping video and music at me while I'm trying to do that. I get upset when I go to church and I hear a thing that doesn't have any rich text to it and all of that. You know, music needs to count. And like her singing, it needs to go beyond the ear and penetrate the heart. So how do we get that? I think one thing is we involve as many people as we can. We involve the congregation anytime we can. And when we do have rehearsal with singers, we make sure that the music we pick counts. And, I've done lots of interims, part times. In fact, just in the last couple of months, Presbyterian Church, Episcopal Church, Methodist Church, in the coming weeks, a small Presbyterian church nearby I've never been to wants me to come. And every time I go, if I have singers, I want the music to count. If it's just playing the piano, I want every note to count. I want when you hear a piece of music, if you looked under the hood, you would find secondary lines and wonderful harmonies that just make the spirit soar. And then I would say that these days, any church musician needs to know that the phone and shoe leather are important. The best ones I've ever known, and I'll tell you quickly this, the first time I was a guest at First Baptist Church, Jackson, Mississippi, and the legendary Larry Black was minister of music. I walked into a choir rehearsal that had 450 singers in there. But when you looked at what Larry did in terms of being part of the community, part of the family, someone who shared the good times and the bad, that he was, so at the bottom, at the end of the day, you can't be just a musician. You really have to be a minister to these people, inspire them to want to do what you're asking them to do.
Thank you again, Benji, for your time today and for everything we've said. And thank you for tuning in to this Composer Spotlight with Benjamin Harlan.